gràcies per la vostra assistència aquí al canal.
Good morning to one and all, and welcome to this YouTube channel that is going to broadcast the different interventions live. I wanted to thank the different institutions that make this possible, Euromed, Fundación Pablo Iglesias, and welcome Lisa Carcedo, President of the Fundación Professor María Pallares from the Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung Foundation. Also, welcome to everyone participating in the discussions. Javi Lopez is not feeling very well, so he will not be joining us, unfortunately. Antoni Llarden, President of ENACAS, Marc Pons, Secretary for Just Ecological Transition and the Preservation of Biodiversity of the also Silvia Paneque, member of the Parliament of Catalonia, Laura Ballerín, Secretary for European of International Policy, Mariano Moreno, President of ENUSA, Emma Nadal, Sustainable Energy and Capacity Building Expert, Roger Albiñana, Director of the EMA. So, Miss Paneque, I don't know if she will be on time because she's coming from Girona and it's very busy. So, dear friends, the COVID, the energy crisis and the healthcare issues have increased the reflections about the globalization process that we thought it was something that was going here to stay. So, the recovery has been conditioned by something else of a great consequences, the Russian invasion of Ukraine and its impact as the sanctions that generate a lot of problems, and the energy security is something very important. Geopolitics is of interest of all governments and of all companies, and also for all the citizens. The geography, the location, the resources, the capacities, the demography, the population have been determined and determining in the countries, and it is even more obvious now. The energy and the Euro-Mediterranean space is a good example. This is what we are going to hear today in these two round tables. So the first one is going to talk about the different challenges and perspectives in the context of energy and environmental crisis, about energy security as the Energy Agency defines it, and in the following decades the energy transition towards a non-fossil fuel, is going to be determined by all this, and the velocity is going to be determined by the investment and the innovations, the politics and the citizens. Also, the safety of the supply means also safety in infrastructures, in transport and cyber security. And we all know this for sure. The war, apart from the tragic consequences for the Ukraine population, has many other impacts, and the sanctions to Russia, the aggressor, and this has an impact on the geopolitics, the inflation, the food prices rocketing, and also the questioning of the European energy security. And this meant a change in the origins of the natural gas and the petrol and the petrol from different regions, not from Russia anymore, and also from Algeria, Azerbaijan. So a diversification of the different sources, and also an acceleration of the energy transition plans in Europe. And the prices of energy has an impact on the society, on the European society, and there will be a relocation of companies. And the second roundtable is going to talk about the energy in the Euro-Mediterranean region, an opportunity for new spaces of cooperation. This region has countries that demand a lot of supply and countries that produce fossil fuels, and with an equal development in the implementation of their renewable energies, and different political and social issues, bilateral issues that are very complicated in many cases, and Algeria, Morocco, Egypt, that makes things even more difficult and that hinder the cooperation between them, and makes the supply even more difficult for the northern bank countries. So the decarbonization horizon of the European Union and will allow the development of the renewable energies, green hydrogen, PV, so that we do not depend on fossil fuels. And we are going to increase the autonomy of the members, and also it's going to increase the dependency on new materials, new minerals that are going to be needed in order to boost this development. The different plans for the hydrogen economy and also the Green Pact will have geopolitical implications, new supply, new value chains, new routes that are going to generate new challenges and new alliances. Let me remind you that the European Union adopted in 2021 a new agenda for the Mediterranean with the collaboration of our neighbors in the south, acknowledging the importance of the region in climate change and the degradation of the environment. And this agenda means that there is an opportunity for a clean energy cooperation. The neighborhood tool of economic development and the European Fund for Sustainable Development are the main tools of the European Union, together with the partner countries. The Commission wants to mobilize up to 7,000 million euros, 21-27, with both public and private funds, up to 30 billion. And also focusing on renewable energies. And I think that in order to make this feasible, we need to link these investments with better governance and a better legal framework. So there is a public interest of these countries, but we need the private participation in projects making all this possible, and also preventing these macro projects of solar plants. So we are going to talk about all this during the morning, and I hope that the different contributions will help you to understand the changes that are taking place. Thank you very much. Now I'm going to give the floor to Maria Pallares, the programs coordinator of the Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung Foundation, whenever you want. Thank you very much, President. Good morning to one and all. It is a pleasure to be in Barcelona to celebrate this 13th edition of the Euromed Political Forum. Our director, Louise Herrero, a representative of the Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung in Spain and Portugal. She has a very busy schedule and she couldn't make it. She had to accompany Tobin Achlich, director of politics of the trade union, in his visit in Spain. So I am going to, on her behalf, tell you that we hope that it is a very fruitful seminar. So I would like to start thanking the Euromed for hosting us in their home, and with the participation of the members in different forums, we are very happy to take a step forward in the cooperation. Then I would like to mention Jordi Santandreu and Mohamed Azahat from the Full Resource Foundation, and Fes Madrid, Covadonga Morales, Susan Etil, for the effort in the realization of this event. So this edition marks this 13th edition of this forum, and we've been more than 10 years developing together with the Rafael Campalans Foundation, which is one of our main partners, and we are really happy that the Pablo Iglesias Foundation has joined us. So this has been adapted to the different changes of the region in the different years, and what has not changed is our focus on the Euro-Mediterranean region, and also calling the attention of the politicians and the public opinion about these common challenges that we share in this region. This is why we are very happy to hear the announcement of José Manuel Álvarez of the celebration of a Euro-Mediterranean summit in the Spanish presidency. The last Euromed summit took place in 2008 in Paris, so 15 years ago. So, as we are in Barcelona, I don't need to underline that the Euro-Mediterranean region is an important and paramount space for Spain, Catalonia, and the southern of Europe. It is also an fractured and unequal space. The Mediterranean is the most deadly and unequal border in the world. So this means that we need a transformation, this double dual transition, green and digital, the impact of climate change. As we are talking about a more vulnerable region, and also the transformations and the effects of the pandemic, of the war in Ukraine as well. So these challenges in the region have a transcendental meaning, and Eduard Solé, specialized in the region, I suppose you know him, said in an article in the CDOP think tank that Northern Africa and Middle East are the regions that feel the impact of the war in the Ukraine after Europe. There are multiple impacts, we can say. The prices of energy, the cereals, and at the long run, other diplomatic and geopolitical challenges, and through the reconfiguration of the space as well. So we want to discuss these challenges of this new geopolitical situation, and to explore the different cooperation spaces for the energy transition between the countries in both banks. I think that the diversity of the different profiles accompanying us in the morning, men and women, businessmen, politicians, experts, pundits, it's just a sample of how difficult and complicated these topics are. And I take the opportunity to thank the speakers for being here, because I know their agendas are really busy, and especially also to the ones who traveled from foreign countries. I also wanted to thank the audience for being here, and both here and virtually through the different YouTube channels of the Rafael Campanals Foundation. And with this, I'm going to close these opening remarks. Thank you very much. Thank you. Now I give the floor to Luisa Carce, the president of the Pablo Iglesias Foundation, co-organizer of this event. Thank you very much. Dear Pepe Montilla, well, it's a pleasure to be here and to share once again this reflection about the future of social democracy, and with two foundations, and also a reflection about something that was not a tradition. In the end of the 19th century, when our parties started to flourish and have an impact on the society, and give an answer to the emancipation of the workers and the society in which we were looking for social justice in democracy. So we have the challenge of the climate change and the global warming linked to the development of the fossil fuels, and we are in a region in which it is like a melting pot of consumer countries and producing countries based on the they base their industrial production in the security of the energy supply, using these fossil fuels. So we are sharing the space, the Mediterranean space, with producing countries of these countries that produce this energy. So it is difficult, and Mark is here to say it, and it is very difficult that the citizens assumes the real risks, and as a consequence of the impact on our country of this global warming, and it's more than a climate change, it's a global warming that is going to have consequences on the future of human beings. So we are facing two recent events that made possible this collective awareness and this implication of this process, and kind of suicidal behavior, because we are damaging our habitat, the place where we live, the only place where human beings can live. I am a doctor, and I like to underline that we are not cyber beings. We belong to the ecosystems, and we cannot harm the habitat that makes us alive and gives us life. So these two recent events, as I said, have contributed to the increase of, to raising the awareness of citizens. This vital need to have a planet that allows us to develop the human life. And these two events, for different reasons, like the pandemic, the coronavirus crisis, and we have a scientific capability that allowed us to know the disease, this COVID disease, the physiopathology of the disease, the behavior of the virus in the human being, and also to look for the treatments and have the vaccines thanks to these scientific capabilities. These allowed us to reduce the impact on the human beings. But this doesn't mean that the risk is over, not at all. And the World Health Organization has been telling this for many years, that the global warming is going to cause many more pandemics, and not in developing countries. It's going to be for all the countries. And this COVID pandemic is like an alert. And the other impact that we lived as a humanity and that contributed to accelerate the changes towards an ecological transition was the Ukraine war. The energy dependence of Europe on fossil fuels coming from Russia, basically. So this made us accelerate this process that was very difficult, and it's difficult for the citizens to understand it. That we need to accelerate, we need to do research, the great amount of capabilities of that are not used at its full potential, and we need to change this crisis into an opportunity to boost these other types of energies that do not cause the warming of the planet. And all this in a region, in the Mediterranean region, is like a summary of our problems, and the opportunity for the Mediterranean region to take a step forward and to be one of the, because it's one of the basins that faces one of the highest impact, and we see the countries that are receiving the highest impact of the climate change. We saw it in the recent COP meeting, and the Euro-Mediterranean region also is going to be hardly impacted by this global warming, and this means that we have to give an added value to the natural capital of the region and the biodiversity. And we saw the wildfires, the scarcity of water recently, for a non-sustainable use of the natural capital of the region. And this is why we need to give it some food for thought and reflect upon the opportunities that can start changing the Euro-Mediterranean region, and also this opposition between the producing countries and the consuming countries, and this different interest. So I think that these two roundtables are going to be really interesting, with very wise experts that can give a lot of answers to these questions. And this Mediterranean region and the cradle of the human civilization. So I think we're going to learn a lot of lessons from this. So thank you very much for having invited me, and thank you for being here and for collaborating in this seminar that is going to be really useful.
Bien, pues daríamos paso a la primera.
So we're going to start the first roundtable.
Pues bienvenidos.
Welcome to the first roundtable of the Euromed Forum. This roundtable is called Challenges and Perspectives in a Context of Environmental and Energetic Crisis. We would like to take stock of the global geopolitical situation around the energy crisis, and specifically after the invasion of Ukraine and the consequences on the Mediterranean region. We have seen in the previous presentations this topic, because this implies a number of short-term and medium-term challenges for the region. In order to talk and discuss about this, we have two panelists. First, Antoni Jardén. He is the president of Enagas. For those who are not familiar with the company, Enagas is a natural gas transport company that manages the gas system in Spain. It is an international reference in the development, operation, and maintenance of energy infrastructures. We also have Silvia Paneque. She's an MP of the Parliament of Catalonia and the Secretary of Ecological Transition of the PSG party. We also have Marc Pons. He is the Secretary of Ecological Transition and Preservation of the Biodiversity of the PSOE party. And finally, we have Abdallah Al-Shamali. He's the coordinator of the regional project for climate and energy in the MENA region of the Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung Foundation in Jordan. Let me explain a little bit what we're going to discuss today. I'm going to make some questions, some of them more focused to one panelist or another, but you can always say what you want. We could begin with some initial remarks regarding what are the first ideas or impressions you would like to share around the title of this roundtable. We could start with Antoni, please. Thank you so much. Thank you all. I would like to congratulate, and I'm thankful for the invitation to the Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung the Camp Alliance Foundations and the Public Relations Foundation as well, and also to the Euromed Institute, which is hosting this meeting. I'll try to be brief. Let me give you a bit of context. I'll be talking about the European situation and around the Mediterranean as a consequence of the invasion of Ukraine. Let me give you just some details about the context. I'll be focusing on gas, but not only gas. Few quick ideas. In Europe, due to many reasons, in the European Union, we haven't had a common energy policy. This is not good or bad, it's just a remark. As a consequence, each country has relatively different energy matrix with things in common, of course, gas, renewables, but for example, Germany, who's getting rid of nuclear plants, and France is doing just the opposite. So we have different energy matrices. So as a conclusion, we haven't had an energy domestic market. What happened on the 24th of February? This structure collapsed because we realized that we need a common energy policy. And there's a paper by the European Union, repowering the European Union. It was made on the 8th of March, that for the first time talks about Europe requiring a common energy policy, and that this common policy is based on three basic pillars. First, energy transition process, security of supply process as well. That's interconnection capacities, not only gas, also electricity, hydrogen and renewable gases. And the third pillar, which is the pricing. In general, we're starting to talking about harmonizing these prices and talking about solidarity. This has changed. This is the radical change that has happened in the last 8 months. The EU has held a lot of meetings with energy ministries as never before in order to try to set the basis for this common policy. If we focus a little bit more on gas, which is a fundamental element in all energy matrices, this enormous reliance by Europe from Russian gas is one of the elements that has been a catalyst for this situation. From here, the rules or decisions the European Union has taken, which was something that hasn't been dealt before in general terms at the European level, has become something urgent. So first, the idea was to try to cut this dependency from Russian gas, setting a calendar for that, a number of common rules and solidarity measures to share gas among the countries, and to develop an interconnection policy in Europe, because the gas networks and electric networks are not duly interconnected. There are some geographic problems in the Iberian Peninsula. It's like an island due to geographic questions, but in general, around Europe, there's a lack of a clear interconnection policy framework. Let's talk about highways, for example, cars, buses. If we had in all countries a network of national highways, when we would cross borders, imagine this would become a small passage, and from 4 lanes you go to 2 lanes. But this is what's happening with the energy infrastructure, just to give you an analogy. Based on this, the European Union decided we have to move on. In terms of gas, we've started to talk about common purchases of gas, which has never happened before. This is the positive part of the conflict. The European Union has moved very fast towards a common energy policy. We're hearing a lot of background noise. We find it difficult to provide an interpretation. We need to place this in the context of the energy transition policy. The EU has ambition targets for this, and which consist in electrifying more, and this must be done through renewables, and at the same time to give an opportunity to renewable gases such as hydrogen, biomethane, etc., with the idea that if we meet the targets by 2050 of being carbon neutral, by that time, at the European level, we will continue to have a certain level of gas consumption. So this is going to be like a 30-year transition. China, which I personally think is very committed, they're talking about the horizon 2060. We're not going to discuss that right now, but there's a transition process at a worldwide level. And in Europe, we need to be aware that we have a strong link with the northern shore and the southern shore of the Mediterranean for many reasons. And if we talk about gas, it is obvious that an important part of the European gas comes from Algeria and Libya and also Egypt, just to mention 3 countries that right now are exporting gas to the northern countries. We have underwater interconnections in Spain, because Spain is an example, even though we are an energetic island, and we have 2 interconnections with France, 2 with Portugal, and 2 with Algeria, one that's direct and another one that goes through Morocco. This is helping us to survive during this difficult situation. But if we want to talk about hydrogen, we won't be able to produce the hydrogen you consume in each country. Maybe northern countries, you won't have problems with water, but you will have problems with the sun, for example, with the solar production. So the European Hydrogen Network has been working for a while and thinks that hydrogen, as well as electricity and gas, that we require interconnections to move it from north to south and the other way around. And the Iberian Peninsula, due to historic and geographical reasons, has a certain autonomy in terms of gas, because we can use LNG arriving on tankers, and the interconnections with Africa allows the south of Europe and the north of Africa can be providers, complementary suppliers, in order to solve this dependency from the Russian gas. In the world, there are 4 countries with a similar situation: the UK, Spain, Japan, and South Korea, that for geographical reasons and other reasons have certain flexibility. I still have time. Please keep your cell phones away from the microphone, because there are some interferences. Thank you. So the Iberian Peninsula has a capacity, setting the UK aside because it's not in the EU anymore. So we have 50% of the storage and reception capacity in Europe. So this could be a way and with the countries of the south shore of the Mediterranean, especially those that produce and export gas and oil, we need to work together to allow this transition process in order to produce green hydrogen. Otherwise, we won't succeed. This is something. There's a narrative on the social media saying that all fossil fuels will be exhausted. We might agree, but from the point of view of the countries that export that, it doesn't. This is not the right policy. We need to find a way to do it. What transition period we require, and how can we use or reuse the same infrastructures but producing green hydrogen instead, for example. And this oversimplified narrative we see on the social media, this sort of teenager clique where everything needs to be super short, is not the right solution now. This is not the right discussion. So we need to move on these targets that require global measures. If we produce less CO2, but our neighbor country is producing CO2, we don't solve the problem. So we have to take common steps. So, for the sake of clarity, in this context, in this European context, we have seen changes. And the next week, the president of the French Republic, Macron, and the president of Spain, Pedro Sánchez, and the president of Portugal, Mr. Costa, will be meeting in Alicante, and they're gonna publish the details of a hydrogen corridor and gas corridor from Barcelona to Marseille. So I don't have more time, so thank you for the opportunity. Mr. Antonio, thank you. Let me take the opportunity to remind you that there is interpreting service, so let's try to speak slowly so that the interpreters can follow the speeches. This was just a warning for you. I would like to follow on these lines with the intervention of my friend Abdallah, who could provide us with his take on these changes from the point of view of the southern shore of the Mediterranean. Abdallah?
Thank you. I will be speaking in English, so if anyone wants translation or want to go the device, please do put it on. First of all, I would like to say thank you. I'm really happy with this invitation to this lovely city, Barcelona, and to meet such distinguished people and very hospitable as well. And yeah, it's always important to have discussions and talks about this with, let's say, a cooperation tone, rather than where can we get resources from, and that's I would say, yeah, a view from the south would be very important in this case. The effects of the war has definitely changed dynamics, a lot of dynamics, between the different countries in the Middle East and North Africa, but also the dynamics of how, new dynamics between Europe and the region. And according to some economic numbers, some people would say the MENA region is actually coming out a winner out of this crisis, taking benefit of the very high energy prices that they accumulate a lot of wealth. And on the other hand, there's a lot of, it created a lot of instability in some countries. But I think it's important to not take this as a real measure of how the region is taking on this crisis, because yes, as is known for having a lot of oil and gas, although it's a region we have been unfortunate with a lot of political instabilities, wars, and different crises. So we have, on the other hand, a lot of oil exporting countries, and we have also oil importing countries that facing this crisis almost very hardly. And we have already countries in crisis, political crisis, economic crisis, suffered from war, where the oil exporting countries are becoming more richer, let's say imbalancing the entire numbers of the region. You have oil importing countries that are now more deeper in debt, with the higher prices of food and energy, and already the countries that facing the war and in crisis are now drowning deeper and suffering more into trying to accommodate with the new conditions. But with that still, like these dynamics change comes now with the changing policy of how Europe wants to source its energy. It was quite clear, for at least for the foreseeable future, that that there's an energy transition will take place, and there will be at least a gas phase out to an extent. And now this sudden surge of demand for this gas is now creating kind of mixed messages. These mixed messages could be very dangerous to the energy transition, not just necessarily for European energy transition, but also for the region. One reason of the high energy prices in any way is that there was not a lot of big momentum for new oil and gas infrastructure because of the European long-term policy. And that created also this kind of like short in, let's say, supply and demand, and a lot of oil and gas companies were hesitating to explore and invest in new gas sources because of the demand will be much lower in the future. We have the Euromed, for example, gas, Cyprus, Israel, and Turkey, and a lot of countries were hesitating because, say, like even it was a very high prices, and there's no one to take the gas. So, and the EU had kind of an interest into that source, but it never really materialized because of the long-term goals. And the so this kind of long-term policy also benefited, let's say, the oil importing countries, that they invested more in renewable energy, and there was a bit of cooperation, bilateral cooperation with energy as well, with renewable energy, to implement some kind of renewable energy. And we see with now with the high energy prices that the countries now by themselves, they going a bit more into renewable energy, not because of thinking about the energy transition, because of the high energy prices, and also the decentralization power of renewable energy. We have especially countries like Yemen and Lebanon, where we have destroyed infrastructure of electricity. They going a bit more into decentralized renewables. So this, let's say, is one of the positive impacts, if we want to put it that way, that they want to have this also like kind of independency through renewable energy. And so we see on also more a bit a positive angle, we have new cooperation dynamics. I think the new cooperations now with Qatar, Germany and Qatar, and like with Saudi Arabia, really builds on going new, as they call it, strategic partnerships. And hopefully these are strategic energy partnerships. Don't they just narrowed to gas and oil, but could also expand to energy transition. There was now, on the short term, there's energy prices might be bad in general for the region, but on the longer term, we see more plans for renewable energy. Hydrogen now is being cooked in different countries in the region. Morocco is already like one of the first countries to go through that. Now Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Oman, and even in Jordan, there's energy partnership mainly with Germany, and to develop green hydrogen for the main purpose of exporting it to Europe. And this has been a long dream for a lot of European countries to manifest the energy of the desert, to also help export it to Europe. But here we say that it's important not to look at it as another mining opportunity and not just a resource. It's looking at this way is very dangerous and would harm eventually the countries that has these resources. We should look at this is a new cooperation opportunity, and we should look into the needs of the countries when trying to develop these projects or trying to look at these resources. Eventually, we should have a win-win situation. Yes, if the Saharas and the MENA region has a lot of sun, a lot of renewable energy potential, but also it's kind of there. So if someone wants to take it or to utilize it, like also should be something in return. And we don't talk just money, because usually in these countries, the private sector is mainly involved, and the private sector as well, like not necessarily have a lot of benefits going on to the same country and to the people. And we're talking here about a just energy transition. We should include the needs of the people of the country as well, and how it could be beneficial for the country themselves. And another point is taking resources from these countries slows down their own energy transition. When we talk green hydrogen, it's a very intensive technology for water and for solar. It requires big distances, big spaces for to install solar PV, and even though that they have a lot of distances, technically there's not a lot of places you can place such projects. So if you install a big PV plant, you kind of eliminate that energy to the country itself, and you export it, and then the energy transition in the own country would be slowed down. Well, on water, it's a very critical issue, especially in Jordan, one of the most water-scarce country, but also in the region as a whole. Water is a very big issue, and if it's not solved, if it's not always in the discussions, this could be a very critical to the country itself. One thing we see with this crisis, that there's a lot of talks, a lot of new directions for sure. And this ripple, like it goes down, like now we're having a kind of very bad impacts, food and energy, but there's still a positive side that we can look on, but we need to utilize in the best way possible. We know that Europe is now in a hurry to kind of revise their energy policy, but this should take into consideration also the needs of the other countries that is being very highly affected by it, and we should talk about new corporations, I think we should focus more on the renewable energy parts, not necessarily the gas. We always seen fossil fuels created war and created conflict, while renewable energy offers more room for cooperation and for mutual benefits. And yeah, with that, I think we should just cooperate more.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Mr. Abdallah, for providing some hints about the considerations we should take when on the other shore of the Mediterranean and from Europe as a general, in order to take into account the interests of the southern shore of the Mediterranean. Now, let's move on to Mark Pons. Thank you, Mark. Thank you very much to the three foundations for being in this meeting. It's interesting to be here in Barcelona. My thoughts will follow the same line of the previous interventions. As we said before, the 21st century is moving on, and the logics that set the political agenda of the 20th century are no longer valid for the 21st century. It was the 2008 crisis, and then the pandemic, the health crisis, and the lockdown with devastating economical consequences. And when we thought we were raising our heads again, we found ourselves in a new crisis which has a political origin but has tremendous consequences, and this highlights the priorities have changed. The priorities of the 21st century we should focus on, and that will be the main challenges and will be in the political and social agenda of the 21st century. Undoubtedly, we find the challenge to fight against global warming caused by 150 years of economic growth based on the consumption of energy resources with collateral effects, some of them, of course, that are clearly negative, and that forces us to place this problem at the center of international, national and local policies. We see different ways to approach them, and this first reflection, which I think is obvious and shared among us, maybe we could say that a long time Spain has followed these initiatives very late. I mean, what I'm talking about is the policies of Spain in this. And 2018, after the change in the government, we set new priorities in the political agenda that were not on the map before. And the president of Spain made the same reflection I was sharing with you. And he added two fundamental elements. If this is the biggest problem of humanity in the 21st century, and therefore is the biggest challenge we need to tackle, Spain shouldn't stay aside. So we need to face the problem, tackle the problem, and get involved with everyone who wants to swim in that direction. This has not always been the case. If we look at the history of the recent history, we missed a lot of opportunities because we have decided to turn a blind eye to the problems of the world. This is an ethical and moral reflection, also a leadership problem in international geopolitics, because now Spain has decided to play in the big leagues and to be a part of the solution. And now there's another topic. If this is the main challenge of the 21st century, as a country, we should turn this crisis into a big opportunity. And let's see how tackling it can be an opportunity to build on it and to strengthen the country. So it's an opportunity to lead the change, an opportunity to grow, both in economic and social terms when facing this crisis. We can analyze this and approach this from the perspective of what represents to increase the competitivity of our economy and our industry. But at the end of the day, this will change the trade balances of the country, because we won't have to purchase energy products through importing because we cannot produce them, and we change this with energy production capacity through renewables we have already. In Spain, we won't have to purchase certain products, and we will be modifying these commercial balances and gaining competitivity. If we also bear in mind that basically the best strategy, or one of them, is to approach this energy transition and therefore to produce energy, let's not take only the objective of just producing energy, but we need to reshape our industrial panorama to produce this energy. And here we have a new opportunity to reindustrialize our country from two approaches. One, let's see what we need to produce to generate that energy. Right now, 90% of the components of wind energy are being produced in Spain, and 50% of the solar energy can be produced in Spain. But we should aspire to more. We need innovation technology and orientate the productive sectors to take this path. This is an opportunity we have. There's a second one.
And we see how some regions in Spain are playing this game, focusing on this. If I produce a lot of energy and I'm reducing the costs, then I can be more appealing for the implementation of some electro-intensive industries in my region. And then we see with surprise that some regions like Extremadura or Aragon decide to implement factories of synthetic diamonds, or a relocation of bigger factories and located in spaces that were impossible before. So we have another element that gives an opportunity to strengthen as a country. There is another one, a third one. If we understand geopolitics, taking into account the energy resources of the countries and the global role is developed, and we understand that in the 21st century how it's going to finish, and these countries are going to produce in a different way, then there is a great opportunity to be more protagonists, and that Spain develops a different role. And this is another element. And there is a fourth one, more social one, economic one, the capacity, although I don't like the word, of the empowering the citizens. So I can produce my own energy on my own without depending on other people. And this is also an important component. And this is something that Spain has done. And it is also paramount. And 7-10 years ago, it was not like this. Before, in Spain, we had the trend to penalize the renewable energies and to continue with the coal. It was another strategy, and in the Paris treatment, Spain just ignored it, and they didn't want to lead any sort of agreements following these lines. And in this scenario, that means an opportunity to strengthen. We have to admit that Spain has some advantages, because we need to want and we need to can. We are a country rich in sun, rich in air, rich in coastline, and rich in, to some extent, water. And we also have a low density of population if we compare it to other European countries. France and Italy has double intensity, France close to double, and we have some provinces actually with less than 12 inhabitants in square kilometer. This is a good opportunity. And we also have a diversified energy infrastructure. And this means that we can assimilate different technologies when integrating renewable energies. And this does not happen in other countries like France, for example, too focused on the nuclear plants and how they have to do it to continue producing this and giving an answer following these lines. And they haven't focused their European funds in the production of renewable energies. They just changed and focused on the taxonomy of the nuclear so that they could be included in the funds of the European funds. Italy, with a population density that doubles the Spanish one, and this means it's difficult to take a step forward. And where are we? Well, Spain is producing in 2021 49% of the renewable energies, and France is in 20% of renewable energies from the mix, and Italy 37%, but with some difficulties in order to take steps forward, as I said. So this situation, in this big transformation of the energy model and the economy model, we see that for the first time we are ready for it. And we are ready for this economic revolution in which we will have to be on board, but we can lead the change, or we can be in the back and adapt because we don't have another remedy. And this will represent a great opportunity. And it is true that when we are in this reflection, and let me finish with this, it's even later the decision, for example, from Mr. Putin of, in order to distort the situation in Europe and also to blackmail us. And if everything I said is important with the war in Ukraine, it is super urgent to accelerate it. And this is another element. The second one, each country fighting this battle on their own, it's not going to happen. So we need interconnection, better relationships. And in this sense, Spain is not well positioned, and this can be a problem. This idea of the energy island that generates difficulties when exporting resources, because we not only want to be self-sufficient in energy, we also want to be self-sufficient in the exporting of this. Hydrogen could be exported as well. And then finally, we have seen that the energy market, the way it's built now, doesn't work, and it forces us to rethink the situation. These synergies are not easy to break, but we have taken the first steps going towards this direction. And the Vice President Rivera has led the way and put on the table the elements that used to be taboo in the past, like establishing the prices, and also when favoring this energy transition. And that's all I wanted to say. The climate change is a big crisis that poses a threat, but it represents an opportunity to take a step forward. Sylvia. And well, good morning. Let me underline my gratefulness in the organization of this seminar, which are very fruitful. Let me start with some reflections, and that link with what I wanted to express. Ms. Carcedo said that the citizenship found it very difficult to see the dimension of the climate change in their everyday lives as individuals and as a society, and also different aspects and different impacts with the COVID, with also the invasion of Ukraine, and more local, like for example in Catalonia, we are in a period of water restrictions after this summer that was really hot. And these questions help the citizens to understand that this is not a cycle, it is not something that a scientific community is just a warning. It has a real impact in their lives. And there is something positive in these negative impacts. I think this is it. And we are all experts in these topics, but sometimes I talk to the citizens in citizenship forums, and then I have to tell them that we are all the human beings are locked in a car at 40 degrees outside, and it's something structural. That's the metaphor I use. And also, everybody talks about opportunity. Abdallah was talking about these benefits of cooperation, and I like to be positive, and sometimes we are very dramatic, and it's true, the consequences of climate change. I like to be positive and talk about opportunities. Mark also said that, looking for the positive things in economic and social perspectives of this big challenge, the climate transition and the energy transition. And In Catalonia, unfortunately, we are not fully convinced yet in this transition. And as I said, unfortunately, we are at the back with this false discussion that is conservationist, and nobody's talking about the opportunities of this green economy and the cost of not assuming it, the cost in Catalonia, at least, of not assuming this challenge and missing the opportunity. And we are in a region that is going to suffer the impact of the climate change, the Mediterranean. In this, we've been in the avant-garde of the industrial field, universities and innovation, contributing with a lot of knowledge. And capital of project, we are talking about these projects that to include in the energy mix. And Mark also said it, the Spanish government is really committed to start this, but in Catalonia, if we take into account the goals of Spain, is important. And if Catalonia doesn't want to assume the role, this has a negative impact at Spanish level. So unfortunately, as I said, Catalonia is not participating in these opportunities generated by this change, this green generation. And I think that there are three aspects in which we can see that. So this transition can contribute a return of nature in urban spheres. So this transition and this coexistence of urban and rural settings, making the most of the water, green infrastructures and transitions to the rural environment. Catalonia is a city of cities, so it would be a great place for this return of the green infrastructures in order to have more resilient cities and this contribution to fight against the climate change. And these are municipal initiatives, but there is not a clear direction in the regional government of Catalonia. As Mark said, we have to talk about competitiveness and reducing the dependency of our economy. And different words that say the same, actually. To generate these energies, these basic resources, gives us more efficiency, more autonomy. And the word empowerment, I don't know, because this citizen integrates in this system of generating energy in order to electrify different aspects of the city and of our environment. And also the market of own energies and a better management of the water cycle. So this transition, this new green civilization, is also economy, industry and mobility. And I think this helps us to be aware of the impact. The energy transition is not just a PV panel. It's more, its transformation, its growth, is investing in a more advanced country with some urban environments that are developed. And it is also progress, innovation and growth. And as I said, now there is a false debate and also a bucolic vision, going back to this path, this rural environment in which there will be no impact when we don't talk about the impact that we are going to have if we don't assume this transition. So it's not because we don't have enough projects, and it is a lack of boost. Not enough boost, not the same boost as the Spanish government. And this is the situation in Catalonia. Marc gave examples in other regions of Spain that saw an opportunity of reindustrialization. I have to say that unfortunately in Catalonia, these are missed opportunities because of this lack of political boost. And in Catalonia, there were some declarations of politicians saying that it doesn't happen if we lose another decade. Yes, it's dramatic. The emergency situation requires real action. In Catalonia, we are in the queue in the generation of renewable energies. In Spain, 30%, and in Catalonia, between air and PV, it's 7%. 7%. A very industrialized region with an intensive use of energy. And we have a tool, the ProEncat, that gives us different scenarios in Catalonia. So we know the path we would have to walk. It's not taking place, but we know it. In Catalonia, we would need 10,000 megawatts in renewable energies. And in 2030, 2030 is just round the corner. We have 1,200 megawatts installed. We would need 10,000 for 2030. And the regional minister of Catalonia said that we have installed 259 megawatts, 259, as if it were something paramount. It would take us 40 years to achieve the goals that we have for 2030 at this pace. And as I said, in Catalonia is 7% the use of renewable energies out of the mix. And also, just to give you an idea, when we talk about the impact on a territory and this ecology, these green and ecologist movements that are not advocating for this transition, and they are putting some obstacles in the territory. And in Catalonia, we have 7% of territory with roads, with buildings, with cities. And we, in order to achieve the goals of 2030, 2050, we would need 67,000 hectares of the territory without these constructions. So, and I say it because in Catalonia it seems like we are going to have PV and air and wind turbines, but no, this helps us to understand the level of anthropization. Let me conclude with some conclusions. So this new green civilization is ambitious and industrial, and the figures in Catalonia are not good. They are bad, to be honest, and we are behind the schedule, and the government is not implied. They don't want to assume this. It's not fighting climate change. It's also a great opportunity for Catalonia, economy and social wise. And I think that the government right now is hiding behind these discourses, but we don't see the reality, like this wind 259 megawatts in 1 year. Thank you very much, Silvia, and thank you very much to the four of you for your contributions. We have now a vision of all the things that are taking place. And as we are behind the schedule, I would like to do something and make a summary of the questions that I have, and also with some remarks that you already said. And we are going to make a round of answers, and then we we will open a Q&A session for the public, for the audience. So my first question or remark would be, maybe for Mr. Yarden, in order to understand what's at stake, we need to know which is the structure and the potential of the energy in the region. So, which are the main routes of gas pipes and other infrastructures regarding the supply, the provision, and also to see, because we've seen that the situation for Spain means an opportunity. So where are the advantages for Spain? And also we should also ask which is going to be the positioning of the Iberian Peninsula, and Mark already answered, but which are the conditions what does Spain need to become this energy hub for the supply of the energy. So these would be the first round of questions, and then another round of questions would be related to the fact that Spain is positioning as a new energy hub, but it's not the only one. In the southern Europe, we also have a competitor, I don't know if that's the right word, Turkey, that also develops a fundamental role. So, as far as I'm concerned, this opens up other questions. So, from the European perspective, can we trust the supply of the region from Russia to Turkey, and then to trust only one country, now Turkey? Because as Mr. Daden said in his intervention, the Turkey issue and the security of supply. So these would be the different things I wanted to mention. Feel free to answer whatever question you want to answer, and if it's all right, we are going to start following the same order, and then if there are questions from the audience, we will open up a Q&A session. Thank you, Maria. Well, I'm going to try and be fast. In the situation in Europe, starting with the gas supply, short and mid-term, the emergency is being able to substitute our dependency on Russian gas and from other complementary sources. So here, the Iberian Peninsula has a role to play because of the flexibility we have of receiving gas through pipelines from Algeria. Algeria, by the way, has never failed us. Never failed us. It is something we need to take into account. This is the reality. And then we have a capacity in the Iberian Peninsula, both Portugal and Spain, to receive LNG. And just to give you an idea, the gas that we receive in Spain has different characteristics. First of all, in September last year, we started some measures before the rest of Europe started with their measures. It was to incentivize the arrival of LNG in Spain, more LNG. So 250 vessels, tankers of LNG arrived in Spain. This year, we will be up to 350 vessels, tankers, 100 more. And this allows us to have a better situation. And in the world of the past, up to now, of the just-in-time, the fast click, no need to store things. You're losing money if you store things. The just-in-time theory and philosophy. So I received this because I need it now. But now we have to think in the just-in-case philosophy. And now we start thinking about storing not only gas, also electricity, because we are not able to store electrons. We need batteries. But if we talk about spare parts and the manufacturing of pharmaceutical products, we realize that this is what happened. This is not against globalization. It's only that the supply chains are more important than we thought. So the storage capacity of Spain is very important. And another idea, 5 years ago in Spain, we received the gas demand and it was solved in 70% through pipeline and 25% through plants. And 20 years ago, it was 100% plants. Now it is 75% plants and 25% pipelines. This shows that you cannot say, no, it's going to be like this and it's going to be like this forever. And in some international meetings 2 years ago, they said, why don't you close some gasification plants in Spain because you don't need them that much. Nowadays, 75% of the gas comes from the plants. This is one of the lessons learned by Europe. In Germany now, they have started a super urgent program to have these tankers that can be used as regasification units, floating storage regasification units, and also they want to build between 3 and 5 regasification plants on shore, permanent plants. This is a change in the paradigm in the Iberian Peninsula. We can receive gas, we can store gas, and we can retransport it through pipelines or through tankers, because now we know how to fill tankers. So the gas that we receive in Spain, it comes from 14 different countries. The first supplier is United States. 10 years ago, United States started exporting gas. Back then, we used to believe that we were going to get a lot of gas from the United States, but the prices were not competitive. Now, the second country of origin is Algeria, the third Nigeria, the fourth Qatar, and then there is a number of countries, Trinidad, Tobago, and many others. And this gives us some flexibility. And this happens in Spain, in Portugal, France in a way, but then it's more further beyond is more difficult because of the lack of infrastructures, storage and interconnection. And here is where we could have this underwater pipeline from Marseille to Barcelona. Then we have interconnections with Morocco in Algeria. And our interconnections are fundamental. There is a direct interconnection through Tunisia towards Italy, and then from Libya to Italy. And talking about Eastern Mediterranean and Turkey, Turkey has a role to play, and as a country that is a neighbor of Europe and of the Arabic world, Asia, and Russia. So we in Enagás, we are shareholders of the Adriatic pipelines that transports gas coming from Azerbaijan, going through Turkey, getting into Greece, through Albania, the Adriatic Sea, and then landing in Italy. And it is one of the few supplies of gas that don't come from Russia. So it is also something we need to take into account.
This infrastructure started to work 2 years ago, and I remember clearly that by that time we thought, is this really necessary? Well, it's a way to diversify, to have different prices, and now the European Union has started a process to try to double the capacity of this pipeline, with an agreement with Azerbaijan and the rest of the parties involved, because it's just one more source we can use. Turkey, Cyprus, Israel, Jordan, Egypt. There are a number of projects there that could provide more sources. So instead of talking about competition, I would talk about complementarity, because we won't be able to have greater security of supply, because we must not rely on just one source. People say we must not rely on the United States. That's not the question. We need to have different ways to obtain and store the gas, and that also implies that we need infrastructures to do that, taking the environment into account, of course, but we need a number of things we need to do in order to achieve this. The price of gas in Europe before the crisis last summer, I'm going to use a unit of euros per megawatt. In the United States, they say they use thermal units. In the United States, it was 15, in Europe 25, and in Japan, Korea, in Asia 35. In August, during the war in Ukraine, gas in the United States went up to 35, in Europe to 300, and Asia 115, 120, because China was compensating for that. And yesterday we reached in Asia 110, 120, and in Europe more or less that. So prices go up and down, but as a whole, the United States were around 22, and we have the European average, which is 4 times the price of last year. We cannot support this because the industrial demand has gone down by 25%, because gas has been replaced by normally more polluting energies. For example, in Germany, electricity is produced with a lot more coal, than before. And we couldn't, another effect is that we cannot transfer the cost of energy directly to consumers. And to wrap up, with the countries that at present are our main suppliers in Europe and Asia, I think we need to keep collaborating with this commitment for the energy transition and to find solutions that allow us all to move forward in this direction. For example, the production of green hydrogen in Spain and the north of Africa in general, due to geographical reasons, is feasible. With the prices we have today, a big part of these projects would be feasible without subsidies. And probably it is something that if we invest, we will gain expertise, we will have lower prices, and we will be obtaining an opportunity to share wealth. This is the way. Thank you, Tony. Now it's the turn of Mark, because who needs to leave sooner. I need to take a plane at 1, so I don't have much time. I'm sorry about that. Let me say just 3 things. One, following what Tony said. Can we be an energy hub? Can we be a good receiver and distributor of energy? That's the question. And we have done a number of things that can make this possible, but do we just want to be a big energy hub, or do we need to aspire to be producers? Yes, undoubtedly, if we talk about hydrogen, can we be energy producers and be able to distribute it and export energy produced here? Something that was unthinkable until recently. There's a window of opportunity that no other country in Europe is having. So this different approach is good to integrate it, not in the short or medium term, because obviously we don't have the time. But if we're aware that the energy transition is the debate of the century, and depending on how every country solves this problem, we'll reach the end of the century in a position or another. So we don't need to be content with this idea of being just a hub, but also be ambitious and try to be an exporting country in the center of Europe. A second thing, Tony was talking about the opportunities that the distribution and the fact of being a hub represents for Spain. And in terms of transport of electricity, the situation is a bit more complicated, because the interconnections we have with France in the Iberian Peninsula are very precarious. We are interconnected by 2%. By 2020, it was agreed to have a 20% interconnection, 10%, sorry, and by 2030, 15%. The interconnection with the Gulf of Biscay is now being built with 5,000 megawatts. And then we have the interconnections in Aragon and Navarre, which are incorporated in the Spanish planning, but not in the French planning. And it's not planned to take them into account. So this puts us in a difficult situation. This is a critical point we need to discuss. There's an opportunity in Alicante, but this requires a long-term work. The bar mark has been solved, the gas part has been solved through good alliances between Germany and Spain that has made France have a different view of Europe, but the electric side is more difficult. And let me finish with something I'm convinced of. Within this deep debate and this crisis and how we find a solution, I realized that the only ideology that is providing a feasible, real and possible solution is social democracy. I'm not talking about negationists, which won't be able to solve the problem, and the right-wing liberal parties where moving economic structures is more complicated, and you see it's like a delayed strategy, how to continue with the same model for longer instead of tackling or facing the problem. And other political tendencies, I see a lot of awareness, but they are a bit catastrophistic, not realistic, and the only ideology that's able to analyze the situation, build a roadmap. There's a climate change act in Spain that's been enacted and funding devoted to energy transition. So there's a possible way with all the hurdles you can think of, but only social democracy can find a solution, in my opinion. In Catalonia, it hurts because I appreciate you, but in the last 5 years, she was talking about 2022, from 2016 to 2021, the last 5 years. In Aragon, we've seen the implementation of 4,000 megawatts of renewables. Same in Andalusia. In Catalonia, just 14 megawatts. And now they're very happy because now this year they achieved 200, and it's 4,000 in Aragon. So there's an opportunity in Catalonia. You could tap. You need to start working on that because there's a lot at stake. And that's all I wanted to say. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm really sorry to leave the panel because I'm going to miss my plane. Thank you.
Now maybe I think the change in policy and talking about hubs, we might as well talk about what kind of different hubs exist in the world and how can these different regions cooperate together. I think there's a more important role for how this new energy diversity is going to happen and achieving energy security. And I think most importantly now we need to reinstate the discussion that we are still in a climate crisis. I know that a lot of talks now are mainly focused on energy because it's the most present issue, and we even saw this in the conference of parties, the climate change conference in Egypt this year. The discussions were mainly about diverted from reducing emissions towards something else, and some people say that this is maybe a win for the least developed nations, that they want more adaptation, but I think this is also an indication of how carbon emitting countries are now, even the ones that were looking positive to climate, they say, okay, please can we just maybe have a pause on the situation until we solve our own issues. And this, I think, is very dangerous. And we should start restart these discussions to talk about not necessarily refilling our energy needs, but also talk about energy efficiency and talk about how can we reduce our energy needs without necessarily impacting our progress, because let's say development or economic development is not necessarily related to expansion, and we should always talk about progress, but not necessarily about how can we increase our economic growth. Having infinite economic growth, I think, on the long run is maybe something impossible to achieve. At some point, we need to talk about sustainable growth, and this would definitely need to reconsider energy consumptions and energy distributions around the world. And as said by the fellow panelists, we should take into consideration these connections between different regions. And on the bigger scheme of things, we in the energy transition, if an energy transition should be achieved, for sure interconnections must be first made. We're talking electrical grids interconnections, and as well to the gas pipe. This is on the long run, but this is one of the challenges and the facilitator to achieve the energy transition. You have these kind of interconnections, and from the MENA region, if you want to talk about how you can achieve a greater renewable energy share, we talk about how we can make these interconnections between the different countries. We still have it solving these interconnections, but also like through Spain is going to be a major path for interconnection to connect the two regions. And this will, first of all, enable a lot of renewable energy to flow to Europe, but at the same time to stabilize or give more capacity to install renewable energy for the countries themselves. So this is more, let's say, it's both technical and political requirement. And there's emerging now dynamics, or a little bit changing now. Algeria has been like a strong gas ally for countries in the southern Mediterranean. But not to also forget the crisis now happening between Algeria and Morocco. And this now has given Algeria, I think, more lever, because now more European countries are dependent on Algeria, and Morocco was dependent on Algeria as well for gas. And now the political scene must be carefully reassessed, not to cause more instability. If there's more reliance on a European country, this means, I think maybe in the future there could be also a big impact on how this Sahara dispute is going to be seen. Let's start talking how we can this hub be again a room for cooperation, and how it's part of other hubs to connect the world together.
Muchísimas gracias, Abdallah.
Thank you so much for your comments, and with the words of Sylvia, we will finish this roundtable. You'll have the opportunity to make questions directly to the speakers during the coffee break, and during the second roundtable, I'm sure there's going to be some time for questions. Sylvia, very quickly, Maria, because then we will have more time to talk during the coffee break. The link between social democracy and the connection of this ideology with the moments we're living, I would like to say that we talk a lot about a fair transition. This transition cannot be a source of inequalities for the vulnerable groups of society, another element for segregation. There's a survey by the engineer college in Catalonia that estimates that the impact of the transition for each citizen is 8,000 euros per person. So for a family is much more. The cost of not doing it for Catalonia or not doing this transition is 9 billion euros a year due to the purchase of energy due to the high energy dependency of Catalonia. That's 4.2 of the GDP. So if we say that this transition needs to be democratic, it is also true that we need a public and private collaboration, because the public institutions cannot undertake the economic impact of the transition. Catalonia, in this interconnection framework, would have a privileged geographic position, but we need the infrastructures. And I was talking about the dynamism of the private and academic sector in Catalonia. And just to give you a couple of examples that are waiting some political momentum, with the Green Hydrogen Valley in Tarragona, a project that I think that could be successful if they have the public leadership. Yeah, we are coordinating this with the university. And also a project I became aware of a few days ago related to energy, waste-based energy, that is biomethane. I think you talked about before, Antonio. And there's a project for a biomethane corridor from the south of the Iberian Peninsula to the north. And here, Catalonia, if this loss of opportunities is confirmed, we have a geographic, a good geographic position, and the proximity to Aragon would imply that we would have another electric interconnection to feed the industrial needs that requires energy, and we lack of the renewables to do this ourselves. Thank you, Silvia. Thank you to all the panelists and all the audience, both in person and online. See you in 15 minutes.
this second round table. After the first session, very intense, very fruitful, that gave us a very broad perspective. So in this second session, we would like to make a zoom in into the territory so that we can analyze from different perspectives and different places in Europe and the Mediterranean. If in this new geopolitics of energy we can open up real cooperation spaces, if we see new opportunities for a region that is going to be affected the most by the climate change and which is also central in this energy crisis and the conflict in Ukraine and suffering from some endemic problems for the last decades, despite the Barcelona process. And we have Laura Ballarín, Secretary for European and International Policy from the Socialist Party of Catalonia. Hello, Laura. We have Mariano Moreno, President of ENUSA. We have Iman Adel, who is an expert in sustainable energy of the Regional Center for Renewable Energy in El Cairo, and Roger Albiñana, Director of the European Institute of the Mediterranean. Thank you very much. So we have just 1 hour, so maybe we can ask a few questions, make brief answers to make everything very dynamic, 2-3 rounds, and also open a Q&A session for the audience because we didn't have the opportunity to open one after the first round table. So first of all, I would like to talk about, we are talking about this new power plant of the Mediterranean, this new hub of the Mediterranean, if this new geopolitics of the energy, if it's going to facilitate the cooperation, so longed cooperation in the Mediterranean, or maybe it's going to create more polarization. It's going to create more conflicts between countries and regions. So in this sense, also Laura, in Brussels, how do you see it in Brussels, this new centrality of the Mediterranean, and if it is really instrumental or if it's perceived as an opportunity so that the Mediterranean is more present in the European agenda? So maybe we can start with Iman, our guest, who traveled from very far away to give us a first vision from El Cairo, from Egypt. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for this very nice introduction. And I'm sorry for giving my intervention in English. Actually, I have been in Barcelona many times. My master's even was from here, and I have tried to learn in Spain, but it was that much difficult for me. So going to your question, I see that recognizing the need for integrated global approach to green-based solution is the only way to translate the climate commitments from just commitments to implementation. And this could happen by our cooperation together. During cooperation, we have to address the main pillars that could facilitate it, because as we have mentioned before, this geopolitical conflicts could be replicated again if we didn't consider regulations and the structures that could build the cooperation in a very positive way. So we have also to consider the fiscal incentives for the green technologies. We have to consider infrastructure investment. And going to the infrastructure, let me add to Paul the fact of facing a huge conflict during the 2 years of the pandemic. It ruined our resources, the whole world resources actually, and we have been in a critical economic situation after that. Then we came to the conflicts among different countries, not only Russia and Ukraine, but also Morocco and Algeria in our countries. So this affects the cost of steel that have been doubled, the cost of copper that have been raised by 70%, and even the cost of transportation that have been raised by 5%. So overall, the cost of commodity raised and affected the energy sector. And when I'm saying energy sector, I'm talking about electricity, heating, and transportation. So at the end, we have to consider the infrastructure investment and smart infrastructure to be used, knowing that Europe invested 25 years for building this infrastructure that is existing nowadays. But what is requested now is to build more modified infrastructure within only 5 to 7 years, which will be was a huge challenge among us, especially if we consider having a natural gas or exporting natural gas from our neighbors. The second point is the energy efficiency first, and this, of course, would decrease the consumption of our energy sector and electricity sector as well, which will affect then the final need and our cooperation together. And at the end, of course, renewable energies. I would also add the green hydrogen technology, which is not considered as an energy resource, but it's an energy carrier. However, it could be with a huge benefit, especially in the industrial sector. And that is my intervention.
Thank you very much for your vision, and from renewable energies to other sources of energy. ¿No? Mariano, tenemos otras.
So, do we think that we are in an opportunity to strengthen our cooperation, or maybe it's going to cause more tensions? Well, first of all, thank you very much for having invited me. As the president of ENUSA, I wanted to thank you because it's a pleasure to be in such a forum in Euromed, because it is fundamental to have a social democratic vision to face the problems that we have nowadays. Well, first of all, the energy crisis is not only a European crisis. It seems obvious, but it's not. The world is in an ecological and energy transition that must give an answer to the main challenges to fight against the climate change. The Paris Agreement obliges all the countries to take different measures to achieve the goal to prevent the global warming. So this means a lot of economic and social transformations, many of them complicated, difficult and painful, that have an impact on the most vulnerable groups. So that this type of transformations must be done in an urgent way and fast, and they normally are traumatic and cause crisis. So these crises affect the European Union and also the Euro-Mediterranean region and, of course, all the world. And this region is one of the critical places in climate change, highly vulnerable to the negative effects of global warming. In the worst scenario, 2100 average temperatures could increase up to 7.5 degrees, and the average rain could decrease 60%. The level of the ocean would be an increase of 0.4 meters for most of the countries in the Mediterranean region. So it is important to give a context in the framework of the energy transition and fighting against the climate change. So we need to make this crisis help us. We need to make this crisis help us to do this decarbonization. Nobody said it was going to be easy. This type of transitions are very difficult. And answering to your question, of course, it is not an opportunity, it's an obligation. And if we take into account that the energy needs to fulfill three main principles to guarantee the supply, to be affordable and to be sustainable. So from my perspective, in the Euro-Mediterranean integration can help Europe in this energy crisis. And the Mediterranean countries have an important potential in renewable energies, and resources as gas can help in the supply of this energy. And the energy cooperation with the European Union could help also to develop this growth and social development, appealing international investment to build new infrastructures. So it is an obligation, this Euro-Mediterranean cooperation in the forums, in the existing institutions, or with the creation of new spaces, and even an European union of the energy, an energy union in equalities in which all parties win long-term agreements, taking into account the development of all the countries and respecting the fundamental principles of our political union. Well, thank you very much, Mariano. A lot of food for thought and a lot of things to reflect upon together. And as you said, it's not only a European crisis, but maybe we Europeans are living it in a dramatic way, because we have also a war. We thought it was not going to happen again in Europe. So social democrats in Europe are the lobbyists of the Mediterranean in Brussels. And we have Laura Ballarín in Brussels. And can you tell us, how do you perceive it from the institutions, if this crisis is an opportunity, if this new centrality of the Mediterranean is only energy, or if we have the opportunity to boost a global agenda? Thank you, Pau. Thank you to the three foundations, Campalans, Friedrich-Ebert and Pablo Iglesias, for organizing this very interesting seminar. And perfect timing and with amazing speakers. I've learned a lot. So congratulations to you all. Well, as you said, Pau, here in Europe, we don't focus on the Mediterranean too much. In this last political term, since the beginning, we've focused on the eastern part. Just also before the war, the focus was in there, and then with the start of the war, even more. And all our energies and our plans have been modified because of the war in Ukraine. And the use of energy as a war weapon, and this has an impact on all of us. We are putting limits in our thermostats and paying more, higher bills for our electricity. So we have just kind of awakened from our dependency on Russia energy and our effort to get out of there. And also the beginning of the energy program, which is very obsolete. It was thought for other situations, and they talked about this in the previous panel. But this means that we need to move forward, and something we ask for in the Spanish Socialist Party, to uncouple the price of the gas from electricity, changing the mix and promoting renewable energies in the countries that have more resources. So on the other hand, another challenge, as Mariano said, is what happens with the ecological transition. It was the star project of this commission, of this term, the European Union Green Deal, and all the policies that were developed since the beginning, so that Europe is a neutral continent in 2055. There is a number of files in order to achieve it, and to achieve this decarbonization and being leaders in this transition. So it was a star project, and it was kept despite pandemic. And we don't talk enough about the pandemic, and it stopped the world. And there were some risks back then of these resources in order to face the socio-economic consequences of the pandemic. Could not use to the green transition, but to other things, to help companies, help families. But I think that the European Commission was very smart to create the Next Generation EU funds, the recovery funds linked to the green transition. So reinforcing this priority and giving it even more resources. So now we have another challenge in front of us. So there is a war, there is an energy crisis. We are going to delay all this. Are we going to do that? There are some political parties that promote this. The Popular Party, the European Popular Party, is trying stubbornly through different reports talking about this moratorium and trying to delay and put aside the goals of the green transition to focus on solving the energy crisis. This would be the first challenge, and how the forces and the parties committed to the climate change, so that this war boosts this green transition the same way as the pandemic. And also the scientific evidence shows that this should be an accelerator to move forward. And if we had done this green transition in the past, we would not be in this position. We would not be that weak. And also, how has the European Union faced this crisis? Well, there is a plan that started in May, Repowering You, to have different tools and then face this crisis. And with three main goals: to save energy on the one hand, produce green energy, and diversify the supply as a third pillar. A number of legal measures to create a new energy structure at European level, with the goal to be independent from the Russian fossil fuels before 2030, to accelerate the European Union Green Deal. So there is a number of measures, and I'm going to underline a few things related to today's topic, related to the international partners and in the southern part of the Mediterranean. And there are some political agreements with Egypt and Israel to increase the supply of LNG, and with Algeria and to export gas from the countries from the Gulf region, with Qatar, and the generation of green hydrogen as a great hope to make this energy transition. And also we collaborate with all these different countries from the southern bank of the Mediterranean. There is a great potential of raw material to create this green hydrogen that needs solar energy and water, and then connections. And not only helping them and invest so that they can produce more renewable energies on the other side of the Mediterranean, but also to build these connections that are so necessary. And we see the clear example with the Barmat and many other cases. So, as Robert Kaplan said, in the geography, the realities, natural realities, mark the future of the nations. And it is the most important conditioning aspect, not even globalization. And we can see it now with this crisis. We can see it in Spain with the Iberian Peninsula because of our situation. And we can have prices that are completely different thanks to the Iberian exception, the resources in the southern part of the Mediterranean. But there are two more points from the European Union. Trying not to substitute one dependencies by others. We've seen how weak we are, some countries more than others in the European Union, because we are linked to Russia. But now, with our effort to get out of this crisis at a long run, not to substitute one dependency by another dependency, so substituting Russia by another country. So I think now we are doing a correct policy in this sense. And as Abdallah al-Sashami said in the previous roundtable, this cooperation with the Mediterranean should be beneficial to all. This is an imperative. Taking into account our social democratic vision, we have to underline this. And cooperation is not just instrumental. it has to go together with other policies so that this cooperation is beneficial for both sides, but not only this, in each one of the sides, for the society, for the whole society. It's not only beneficial for a couple of energy companies and that's all. This energy transition has to be fair, and in both sides of the Mediterranean it has to reach the populations, and governments should invest and make the most of these opportunities. And there will be even more opportunities, more investment, more funds, so that they can develop these new energies and can sell us more clean energies, but in line with more public policies that benefit most of the population. And this is what we need to do, the social democratic forces, and this is going to be the great challenge, so that this crisis does not create more inequalities, as Abdallah said. So if now we Europeans go there, we buy all the natural resources that we need to create clean energies, and then they don't have access to these energies, we oblige them to delay their green transition. It's going to be a disaster. So we need to incorporate all this in our discourses and in our policies as well. Thank you very much, Laura. Well, you have anticipated some of the elements I wanted to ask later on, but I would like to listen to the director of the Euromed, because it's an observatory of the evolution of the Mediterranean, because you are explorers, so to say, of the Mediterranean region. Do you think we are facing an opportunity, or we are going to crash into the same obstacles that we had in the past? Well, thank you very much, Pau. And first of all, let me celebrate that you chose the Euromed to celebrate this Congress. I wanted to say hello to the President Montilla, who was for many years president of our consortium. So it's a great honor to welcome you here. And answering your question, not only as an explorer of the European Union, but being optimistic, I think that yes, there are opportunities, and also in this war from Russia, if there are opportunities is in the cooperation, energy cooperation with the southern and the northern banks of the Mediterranean, in natural gas as a transition source, and the blue and green hydrogen, and the production of clean energy and exporting this clean electricity. And we are implementing some of these mechanisms. In lateral gas is where there is less opportunity. So Europeans exported before the war 170,000 million cubic meters of gas per year. And Algeria, just as benchmarking, which is the main producer in Africa, exports approximately 37 million cubic meters. So 170,000 versus 37 million. So the opportunities are reduced. So, and actually the situation is what it is. We saw it in Italy. Italy is the country that is going to suffer the most, because they depend a lot on Russian gas, and in its energy mix, gas is very important, more important than Germany. Germany, as you know, and the ex-president Draghi visited Algeria in order to be able to import more natural gas, and in the end he got 9,000 million cubic meters after these agreements. So we are not talking about big amounts, so it's something positive. the agreement between Israel, Egypt, and the President von der Leyen, all the gas produced by Egypt is going to be consumed for households, and we need to import the Israel gas from the 2 regasification plants in Egypt. So we are talking of a capability of 16,000 million square meters. So the plant in Barcelona has more capacity than the 2 Egyptian plants. So we cannot import a lot of gas from Egypt. So there are possibilities of collaboration, but they are limited. But in hydrogen, we open up new windows and new borders with some agreements by Timmermans signed 1 month ago, a very ambitious agreement with Morocco in this, following these lines. And von der Leyen signed in June a partnership with Egypt. So we can see the 2 powers in the export of green hydrogen from Morocco and Egypt, and Jordan probably at some extent. And in the production of clean electricity, we also have some other opportunities. So which is the problem? Is that in the European position, we are making the same mistakes that we made in the past. And instead of facing this as something multilateral and in which we needed to sit at the table, northern, east, west and south, we are establishing this bilateral idea. So we sign individual agreements with these countries, and then these countries, instead of cooperating, they compete. And then we fall into the same mistakes that we had since 1995 and 2004, generating competition instead of collaboration and integration of the countries in the southern of the Mediterranean. So an initiative that was mentioned with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Madrid is that the Union for the Mediterranean could boost this cooperation in energy, because for the past 5 years we have the 3 cooperation platforms that meet once a year. It's not enough, though. We need to escalate this discussion at ministerial level, though the ministers should talk about this, and the Union for the Mediterranean, should be the forum, as a cooperation forum, that together with the European Commission leads these negotiations that we must have. Well, thank you very much. So going back, and the second question is related to governance. So what is the governance that we need for the region, and if we can stop being condemned to being divided, and if we can have different results doing the same. So which type of governance do we need to put together the different sources of energy, interests of the countries, in order to have this European Union of the energy, and energy as a development vector of social cohesion and sustainability?
So allow me, first of all, to use the climate emergency terminologies that have been raised a few weeks ago at the COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh. It's not a climate crisis anywhere, it's a climate emergency now. And to deliver the agreed global climate goals, we need to cooperate into collectively mobilized and scale-up mitigation and adaptation efforts, including, of course, renewables and nuclear, green hydrogen, and to move from advanced economies to developing economies. From my perspective for the governance methodologies, I think we have to consider the political strategic partnerships through new energy structures and strategic structures among different countries. We have also to consider the potential of each and every country within their context. So, for example, Egypt and Morocco and Saudi Arabia, Algeria, of course, could be a hub for green hydrogen and could also be a hub for natural gas. Italy and Spain could be the hub from the other side in order to achieve this kind of cooperation among the two regions. We could also say that given the same consequences that we are facing nowadays in the whole region, we have to consider the water, energy, and food nexus, not only energy nexus, because the needs of the countries is completely different from different contexts. So to achieve our governance structure and to move forward in this regards and to initiate cooperation instead of competition, as Roger mentioned, we have to consider the three main pillars: wood, energy, water, energy, and food nexus. I would also love to mention the part that have been addressed by Anthony this morning about the global and common steps to achieve the main goals. So when we have analyzing and discussing during the COP the main goals of the Mediterranean countries, it was very ambitious. Egypt has an ambitious goal within 2030, which is, I doubt that they could achieve it actually. Morocco also have a very, very tough goal within 2 years only in 2025. And in order to achieve that, we have to cooperate. I can see also that for the first time, for example, since the adaptation of the UN climate governance, the parties agreed on introducing the loss and damage fund for assisting development countries that are particularly facing a diverse effect of the climate emergency, as we see. So from different pillars, we have to cooperate and to consider the strategic support, the political support, enhancement, this political support, more commitment, and developing more connection policies among the countries. I believe if we could work on those 5 main aspects, we could achieve what we have been here for today.
Thank you so much, Iman.
Mariano, do you think we can do things differently? I would like to say, when we talk about energy security, we normally mean the availability of a supply at an affordable price. But this definition of this concept is made from the perspective of consumer countries, not the perspective of supplier countries. So I think it is good to define this concept from that point of view, because for them, energy security is a guarantee to have a reliable income from their destination markets, because normally supplier markets depend a lot on energy exports. Regarding the common Mediterranean policies and governance actions, the perspective to have a broader energy cooperation framework in the Mediterranean can be hindered by the instabilities in some of the countries, which is related to events that has caused a continuous transformation process and geopolitical reconfiguration that at the end of the day has an impact in the regional and international energy sector. So this persistent instability should force the EU to diversify its strategy, because the supply from North Africa could suffer from cuts related to security issues, but also the EU has the obligation to improve and develop a political dialogue. Instruments such as the Global Gateway from the EU can help solve these sort of situations. This is a new European strategy to promote clean and smart connections in sectors such as energy. Therefore, we need to consolidate, on the one hand, the mechanisms and spaces for cooperation from the political framework with this renewed southern neighborhood, and also with the Union for the Mediterranean. And in their statements, they established their strategy in terms of energy that should be the basis to develop a common energy policy in the Mediterranean basin. This policy, which is more attractive from a political point of view, needs to be reinforced with regional points of view, which are key to achieve cooperation. these inclusions or these initiatives have achieved some results through good relationships between the regulators, network operators, and energy utilities in the Mediterranean. Thank you, Mariano. Laura, you advanced some of your points in your intervention, but regarding governance, this Union for the Mediterranean, which we believe in, but from Catalonia and Brussels, is it seen as the governance instrument, or is the European Union going to continue with this bilateral agreement policy? Thank you, Paul. I think it's both things. They both need to be developed, especially thanks to our role in Spain to promote this. The process of Barcelona, 27 years after its creation, was a bit stagnated, as you know. And we think that this crisis should put on the table this southern region to focus on it, even though the EU is going to continue to promote bilateral relationships, which are maybe too bilateral, but the element, in order not to be too negative, that could provide a new momentum to this process is undoubtedly the Spanish presidency during the second half of the year next year. Last week we held the ministerial forum with the foreign affairs minister, with the high representative as well, and they announced their will to organize a summit of the Union for the Mediterranean and the European Union and the countries of the basin under the Spanish presidency. And if this is held facing the challenges and conflicts in the region, it would be 15 years that a summit like this one has not been held. So the role of Spain here is fundamental. It's instrumental to revitalize, to rekindle this organization, which is so necessary, but it's a bit forgotten from Brussels. And that's painful because there's no sufficient and resources, sufficient attention and all resources given from Brussels. And the interest from many countries that are not related directly to the Mediterranean is very low. So, but last week, during this ministerial forum, we saw the signing or the launching of the Medusa project, which is this underwater cable connecting two regions, 7,000 kilometers long. It is a clear example of the need to continue to cooperate, to promote this cooperation further, and to but we need to look elsewhere. We just don't need to focus on energy just because now we have an energy crisis in Europe. It would be egoistical. We have other challenges, and the main one is the migration problem. Migration flows where people is dying in the Mediterranean, and we should focus on this. How can we use the green transition and the potential of the southern Mediterranean countries to tackle this issue, which is shameful for Europe? Thank you, Laura. Roger, you have had several proposals for many years, which should be the main measures in the current context to reinforce this Mediterranean governance in order to avoid making the same mistakes. Well, I think it is very positive that Spain and Germany continue to work together in terms of energy policies, not only the European energy policy, but also with a higher implication of Germany in the southern Mediterranean in the recent years. It is interesting because there you have points of view that can converge in terms of energy, unlike what's happened traditionally with France. The French position, and this is a personal opinion, beyond the domestic policies, I don't get it. And all this debate with the Par-Mar and Mid-Cat, I understand them from the French point of view, of course, but I don't share them, of course. And I think Spain is doing what it should do, and the Spanish presidency cannot be an excuse to try to solve all their problems, because we're gonna raise some expectations, and the president of the government, he won't be able to face them because he doesn't have the instruments. These instruments are limited because it depends on the Jean-Michel, the president of the council, and if the council is going to be about UPM or southern neighborhood, or is it going to be in Brussels or in Barcelona, a number of elements that are on the table, and they don't depend on the president of Spain. But anything that goes on in the lines of reinforcing two topics, food security and energy security. So energies were claiming to have a cooperation, a multilateral cooperation network in terms of energy in the Mediterranean. It doesn't exist. It exists in small forums held in January, but are very limited to operators of the private sector. So I believe Spain can promote through UPM and other mechanisms, starting with the High Representative of the Union for the Mediterranean, a reinforcement of the governance, energy governance framework in the Euro-Mediterranean space. And Laura has mentioned a few ideas that I also wanted to mention. This idea that whatever we do needs to take into account the countries from the south. We cannot go with agreements to extract resources and not take into account their own needs for energy transition. I read it a couple of weeks ago when the maritime agreement was signed between Israel and Lebanon. There were many Lebanese stakeholders that said, not that we have gas, we can live on it. We just extract it and sell it. No, you're going to use this gas for national consumption, so domestic consumption is going to increase. In Algeria, it's happening too. They cannot export so much gas because they need it for national consumption. It's the same in Egypt with Essor, and it's going to happen in the Lebanon as well. So anything we do needs to try to solve the energy transition in the southern shore countries. Hydrogen production, clean electricity production. They need to use this in order to be able to advance in their own transitions, because with this zero-sum logic, whatever advances we do in the north, we're going to lose them in the south. We just have 15 minutes. We should open the floor to the audience for any questions they might have. I don't know if there's any questions. We have a microphone. We can have a few questions for the speakers. Maria, my name is Maria Paredes, coordinator of programs and the Ebert Foundation in Madrid. I had a question that is for Eman and Roger, but anyone can answer to it if they have any comments. I wanted to know if you could give us, if you know, an example, a specific example of initiatives that exist today or initiatives that potentially could be developed for cooperation between southern countries, Is this crisis we're living is really helping to promote this southern cooperation, which is fundamental in my opinion? Thank you, Maria.
First of all, thank you for your question, because yes, I have some examples that we can shed the light on it. The first one was the most new one that we are working on nowadays is the strategic plan for the green hydrogen in the MENA region. The strategic plan for the green hydrogen is under the cooperation between RUCRI and the League of Arab States, because we are their technical arm, and we have been before initiating the National Renewable Energies Action Plan, the National Energy Efficiency Action Plan, and going to the reinforcement mechanism after that. So nowadays we have working on the strategic plan for the green hydrogen, taking into the account the country resources and the understanding, of course, for the geopolitical solutions and experiences that could enhance our capacities. On another note, the diversified energy resources that can keep the energy securities in parallel with the green hydrogen. So we have started this few months ago. And within the COP27, we had lots of discussions among the key players in the region. And I think we have 3 main countries that could be initiate their strategy very soon, which will, of course, enhance the cooperation among all the South countries. So this is one of the examples, if it's fine with you.
Thank you so much, Iman. ¿Algún otro ejemplo?
Any other relevant examples? Well, there's quite a lot of cooperation with MedRed, OMEC, other institutions that gather stakeholders from the public sector and the private sector in the energy sector and the field of renewables and energy as a whole, transport, carriers, regulators. They are developing specific cooperation projects. However, I insist, there's not a lot of cooperation at the higher scale. Maybe in the Gulf countries, we have cooperation from China as well, even in to a smaller degree in other fields, not only energy, because they focus on gray energy, especially in the Sub-Saharan countries. And China has a lot of presence in terms of investment, in the energy sector in Algeria and to a lesser extent in Egypt. I would like to link all this to a third question, something that Laura mentioned, the European Green Deal, a great plan that goes together with big funding. We were talking about implementing energy efficiencies, sustainable sources, but how do you pay for that? Behind big ambitions, you need big political commitments and financial commitments. This cannot only be paid by the public sector, so we need to find new forms of collaboration. Can we be optimistic? Can we raise the resources to kickstart these big plans and ambitions? Well, I think we can. After all that's been said, we can reach the conclusion that it's not a matter of funding. We need something, a pillar, a basis that can allow us to talk about funding afterwards. You need solid energy market integration in the Mediterranean market, solid collaboration in the Mediterranean beyond energy, and to coordinate all the policies and instruments available to the EU, their institutions, as well as bilateral and multilateral collaborations among the countries in this region. All these elements will provide an integrated energy regional framework with technical rules and market rules and commercial practices that are competitive and transparent, where companies can operate. And this will allow the commercial incentives for the development of this market and this industry. Huge investment is going to be required, that's true, but there are several instruments that can mobilize the investment towards these targets. We have the new agenda for the Mediterranean with our plan of investments with European resources or funds to make this space attractive to foreign investment, and on as well, the High Representative of the European Union started the Global Gateway, which, as you said before, is a new European strategy to promote smart and clean and secure links in the digital energy and transport sectors in harmony with the 2030 agenda and the Paris agreements, which mobilizes from all the European institutions and financial institutions, the European Bank of Investments, the European Development Bank, to mobilize 300 billion euros from 2021 to 2027. 1.8 billion euros have been mobilized to support energy efficiency, renewables, fair transition, and the greening of the value chains. And we also have a mechanism called Connecting Europe to promote caring and digital and energy connections through borders with neighboring countries. And we must not forget the funding to development that from the European Union that devotes 30% of its budget to fight climate change and digital and energy transition. Mariano has talked about some of the measures, but what's the feeling in Brussels? Is there a will to start stepping on the throttle and to provide sufficient funding to tackle all these priorities we have in front of us?
Sí, yo creo que, como
Well, as I said, the pandemic has shown us a lot of things, and one of them is to fund us in a common way to acquire debts together, common debts, and in order to face these common challenges like the common debt for the Next Generation Fund. And in Brussels, we try and copy, not exactly the same, because we have not spent this great amount of money, and there are still some projects that still need to be finished, and there are some problems of absorption of these funds, so to say, because it's being a lot of money, but we have a crisis after the other, and we have resources, because as we said in the morning, technical, political spheres is important and necessary, but we still need a lot of resources because we are talking about very expensive infrastructures. So we are following these lines and asking for another big European effort and to put our forces together. Social Democrats are asking for these European fiscal capabilities, and so that the European Union has some fiscal capabilities, permanent ones that can be used when crises happen. This generates a lot of reluctances from some countries. So we are going to reach some sort of balance, I would say. And also I have like tools similar to Xiii that was implemented by the Commission to fund the furloughs during the pandemic. This would be like loans or credit, so to say. So I think that there are different lines, and Mariano made an explanation of the tools that can be used and how we can have resources. But we need to mobilize them fast because, as we said, Barmar requires an investment of many millions of euros, and all the investments on the other side of the Mediterranean as well. So we need to mobilize efforts, and it is true that the challenge is how we can do that while we have other problems or other things like the next generation. But we are fully aware, and we have, this is the direction we need to follow. It is not going to finish this winter. And also this winter is going to be all right, but there will be many more winters, and the war is still going on. So the cooperation with partners has to go in line with investments and the improvements for the citizens. Well, thank you, Laura.
European will, no? The goodwill from Europe. No? How do you feel, how do you see from the south of the Mediterranean? Do you think that the financial package that is on the table is enough to meet the expectations that we have? Or you from the south would like to point or claim for some of the measures?
So thank you, Paul. Actually, I am not with the part of having appropriate financial hat nowadays, but I totally agree with Mariano that there are several instruments that could mobilize this financial that are existing nowadays, even if they are limited. So, for example, you have to consider the monitoring and evaluation on the projects that have been already in the pipeline or have been implemented. You have also to monitor and evaluate the national strategies, the global targets, and how the countries are committed to it. We have also to monitor and reinforce the regulatory frameworks that have been implemented in the region. Also revising the energy master plan, given the new updates within the whole world, especially in the South countries. I would also say reallocating our resources. So, for example, 15 years ago, Egypt reallocated the resources of the natural gas, and because before 15 years from now, we didn't use natural gas in our households, but nowadays we are using it for cooking and for heating, and also for water heating, and it's very cheap. I mean, you can pay less than €2 per month. So reallocating the resources that you have is something really very enhancement and can mobilize the use of your plan. Also in Libya, before the crisis, of course, they paid nothing for the energy sector. Nothing exact. I'm talking about the household. So they don't have bills for the energy in the household. So on another note, the fund shouldn't only come from the private sector. It could also create it from the public sector. So Tunisia have created the FTE funding mechanism, which is adding a very minor part on the electricity bills from industrial sector, from the commercial sector, and from the residential sector, to be having this hub after that for re-enhancement the renewable energy technologies, having more R&D in this maturity for the technologies, including energy efficiency and in buildings and in commercial sector and even in industrial sector. And by the way, Tunisia is one of the most pioneer countries in the South countries, in the Mediterranean countries for the energy efficiency mechanism. We could also consider the encouragement of having energy efficiency first. Egypt have considered this years ago, and they de-subsidized the electricity for the industrial sector. So we can say now that most of the industrial sector, especially the heavy industries, are heading to renewable energies and heading to more energy efficiency measures in their factories. So fund is an issue, yes, but I totally agree with Mariano and Roger that there is several instruments that could mobilize this fund, and that we can rely also on the public fund, not only on the private fund.
Thank you so much, Iman. Roger, ¿a ti te gustan los temas?
Roger, you like money issues, so where could we allocate? Well, Mariano already mentioned the existing tools, and have many more, so that it's not a problem of lack of funding, at least in the public sector. And through these tools like ERD Plus, in the investment plan of the European Union, and for each public euro to attract private money, especially the Reconstruction European Bank, and is very active in this in the region. And I would say that more than the African Development Bank, but many of these measures are adaptation and not mitigation measures. So there is a problem that Iman mentioned with some clear examples. In most of the countries in the south, electricity is costless because it's funded the same way as the water. The water as well. It is one of the regions with a water scarcity in the world, and the water is subsidized, is funded. So it is a discussion. And I remember I was with the minister in the Egyptian government of oil, Nola, and he told me, yes, we are phasing out, subsidies are phasing out, but then electricity, they have gas, and electricity is costless. So this is a discussion that is very difficult to approach, and that can only be approached with external pressure, with clear goals of decarbonization and moving towards this transition. So it's like a match, and it's not going there to extract, but doing a win-win situation and being aware that they need to do the green transition as well. Otherwise, it's useless. Well, thank you very much. We reached to the end, to the 1 hour that we had allocated. Just 3 comments. On behalf of the foundations, I wanted to thank them, Euromed, Pablo Iglesias, for continuing collaborating in this critical topic. And we still have the obligation to think slowly in order to act fast. And our obligation is to order all these ideas, give them visibility, and then keep on moving forward. I wanted to thank the European Institute of the Mediterranean for welcoming us here, and also everybody who joined us, the interpreters online, because it's hard work, because we speak very fast, and also our commitment to continue. We organized this 13th edition, and there's going to be a 14th and a 15th edition, because we are not going to give up. And it is important to have a Mediterranean that cooperates more than we do. So thank you to you all, and see you soon.